Okay, everybody, we're back here and we're going to be discussing the non-Egyptian zones of Africa, even though some of them are close to Egypt, but still non-Egyptian stuff. So let's just hop right into it. And probably the biggest area, which is right to the south of Egypt, was Nubia. Now, Nubia was very large and it consisted of a variety of different areas. We know that it was to the south of the fourth or fifth cataract, so we're definitely in like the Sudan type zone. The Egyptians themselves refer to them as the Taseti, somewhere around 2300 on a trade mission. Now, that means that clearly something must have been established for a long time prior to this, as you'll see in some upcoming slides here, but clearly they're dealing with Nubia. And much of Egyptian writing that we have from the political era of all of the kingdoms talks about various tactics of these guys trying to subdue the Nubians, and depending on how great you were was how far south in the cataracts you could go. It was mostly city states for most of the early years. We see kind of this multi or polytheistic religion similar to Egypt. I have a couple examples of gods there, just to give you a sense of what was going on. We know they did lots of trade. They dominated the Red Sea trade. So that's basically from Africa going over into modern day Saudi Peninsula, places like Saudi Arabia or Yemen or Oman, places like that. And we know that they definitely had big social distinctions. We know this through different tombs. We can see sizes of houses and other types of structures. And in the end, what we do know is that there were clearly social distinctions. There were clearly multiple professions by all the stuff that we found. The problem is the whole writing thing has eluded us to this point, so there's not much else I can tell you. Now, we do know there was one big empire that did develop early on in Nubia, and that was Kerma. If you look at the map on the right here, I'm circling Kerma. Yay, Kerma. Now, the dates are a little sketchy here. I have 2800 to 1500 BCE. That might be everything. There's no real hard or fast dates here. The empire itself, we know, was named after the city. We do know that they fight some type of war with the Egyptians somewhere in the 9th, 10th dynasty, 11th dynasty zone. And there's some evidence that they were fairly successful and were able to marry into Egyptian royalty, and that quite possibly the 12th and 13th dynasties that ruled Egypt could have been Kerman. Now, what we see again and what we know, just like I said about Nubia to begin with, we do have some large cities here. This is what was left of Kerma, and these are mostly foundations, but it can tell us that they were quite large. Some type of central, whether it be palace or religious structure over here. So this was a large empire. They traded a lot, and they definitely had an impact with the Egyptians. And we have some artwork here. Here's a water buffalo, and then up here we have some wall art, okay, depicting a battle. So nonetheless, and then there's Kerma. And so we want to say from about the third cataract down was really their main area of dominance. And here's some more artwork. We've got toy soldiers, we've got necklaces, we've got pottery. So we see here a very advanced civilization, has all the hallmarks of these ancient advanced civilizations. So nothing to think that they were, quote unquote, not civilized. The biggest one, though, was probably Kush. Not necessarily the biggest one in empire size, but especially in economic power. The Kushites were centered around the city of Napata in the Blue Nile. At one point, they do conquer Upper Egypt, especially near the tail end of the New Kingdom. In fact, King Pi was the ruler of the 25th dynasty, or the creator of the 25th dynasty. But what's interesting here is what we often see is when Group A conquers Group B, if Group B has a very distinct culture, Group A sometimes may actually end up adopting much of it. And the Egyptians did just that. We talked about the Hyksos conquering them, and the Hyksos kind of become pharaohs. And the Kushites were no different. They start building pyramids for on a much smaller scale for their deceased kings. They worship Isis and Amun. They form an alphabet. Yay, we can read stuff finally, and it's kind of based off of Egyptians. And so we really see an adoption of a culture. So despite the fact that they conquer it, they really absorb a lot of the ideas. And unfortunately for the Kushites, just like everybody else that has Mediterranean contact, they get knocked off by the Romans. Here is the original homeland of the Kushites. Remember, set at its height, it's going to get all the way up into here until the Romans go, hello, and they're going to take it over. And here you have some pyramids, and you see these great huge pillars and columns. They're very decorated, again showing high levels of sophistication and wealth. Okay, and some more temples and pyramids. Now, if we go even further south and more to the west, we have sub-Sahara Africa. Now, this is very different. The languages are different, the cultures are different, the goods are different, and the group of people here we refer to are the Bantu. Now, the Bantu were not necessarily any type of empire like the Egyptians or something like that. This is a linguistic term. I would often equivocate the Bantu to the Indo-Europeans. We don't have written language, so we really don't know a lot about them. We know that they were active in the Niger-Congo rivers, probably 7,000 plus years ago. Near the modern-day countries of both Nigeria and Cameroon. They developed some sophisticated languages by about 4,000 BCE, and today over 500 modern languages are descended from them. Most of them are not written. Because these areas or these groups will stay relatively small in scale, the need for a written language wasn't as huge, and in many cases it just never develops. And so that's an important distinction that you do need to know. Okay, now what they're going to do is they're going to start in that area and they're going to migrate over the rest of Africa, everything below the Sahara Desert and below Egypt and Nubia. This doesn't mean that they will never have empires. They eventually will, and you'll have places like the Kingdom of Congo and Malawi, and you're going to get Swahili city-states in Zimbabwe. Agriculturally, what they bring us are things like yams, palm, millet, and sorghum. All of these are pretty dense in calories and nutrition. Yams would actually be the basis for a lot of farming communities because they can grow in relatively drier temperatures or drier conditions. And really what you're going to see the focus of the vast majority of the groups is they live in relatively small villages. And here we have the area that I'm talking about. If you follow the mouse over here, this is pretty much the homeland that we're discussing. Okay. Now, to look at how everything goes, you've got the original Bantu homeland here, and we see some migration over there, but really this is the area where we see the bulk of the migration. They will not get to Madagascar ever. The actual folks that live in Madagascar are not African. We're going to talk about where they come later. Little teaser there to get you interested, I hope. Anyway, but we're also going to see expansive trade networks through here. And I would argue that you could actually say that the Bantu trade was much more expansive than the Egyptian trade because of all of these little tribal groups. You could have a group right here, you get a group over there, you get a group down here, and slowly but surely the products are going to move back and forth. And this is a huge area, bigger than that of the United States, so you're talking about quite a large area to trade upon, where the Egyptians, whereas you did get stuff from like over here and whatnot, this is much more expansive. Okay, and these are just some pictures of the areas modern day. Some other things about the Bantu: they were the first to have iron in Africa. They predate the Hyksos, who brought it into Egypt. They made some weapons out of it, but primarily tools, and tools so that they could farm better and make things like dugout canoes. If I hop forward real quick, this is a dugout canoe. Okay, so you take a tree and you literally dig it out to form a boat. Now, we do not have ocean-going vessels here. We do not know why they never got more than these dugout canoes and why they didn't do something like, say, the Polynesians will, which we'll talk about later. I don't have any explanations for you. The only thing I can possibly think of is they had everything they needed, so why go too far out? They did do some coastal sailing, but you're not talking about anything significantly far. Lots and lots of trade, as I already mentioned. We do have art and things like that. You've got some cave paintings over here of giraffes, quite wonderful. But again, a lot of it was just small scale. You know, the tribe was led by a chief, or often sometimes a council of elders. So the older you were, the more I guess, influence you would have, the use of elaborate tribal initiation rites, and we'll talk about some of those later on in class. But the idea of there's something that you have to go through to become a true member of the tribe, and an incredible amount of ethnicities that descend from these groups today. And we'll be talking about it as we go on. I wish I could tell you more, but we don't have tons of archaeological artifacts, as well as without the written language stuff, it's really hard for us to figure out what even happened. And we see, some great artwork. So we see these great. So on the left we have this incredible artwork. On the right you have shields. So we know that they were militaristic, but in the same sense we know that they had craftsmen and skilled artisans, and their agriculture must have been good enough so that they could go into these. All right, so look at some comments and questions, and we'll get to some stuff in class.